And I always wonder when I see this sort of phenomenon where people refuse to leave, or they make those who are trying to help them endanger their lives, what Russel Honore would say. You remember the retired general, the Raging Cajun, as they called him after Katrina, who was in charge of the relief efforts there after early botchings on both sides. The general joins us right now. Sir, very good to have you.
Good morning, Neil.
What do you make of those who decide to stick around, say, and refuse? Now, to be fair, what were sort of voluntary requests to leave, and of course, at this point, it might be too late for some of them to leave. But what do you make of that? What would you do?
Well, first of all, God bless Texas. After Katrina, the people of Texas were most hospitable. They took most of our evacuees out of Katrina and out of New Orleans. They did a marvelous job, and our hearts go out to them this morning. I think the people who make spectacles of themselves are exceptions. The one I'm most concerned about are the elderly, the disabled, and the poor, the vulnerable population, Neil, that on the 26th of the month didn't have the money to put gas in the car to leave. And those are the ones that were particularly rural areas and small towns along the coast. This is a big area. Texas is big, and when something like this hit it, it's going to have a particular challenge. And as we looked at day one, if we call this D1, Harvey day one, the worst case scenario was the landfall. And now it's category 1. But D2, Harvey day 2, going to be worse than today, Neil, because we're going to have more flooding. And the order of the command and leadership at the state level will be to go to those vulnerable areas that have not flooded yet, but will be flooded tomorrow in southern Houston, in those low-lying areas where you have vulnerable communities like nursing homes and hospitals that the models will show will be flooded tomorrow. Is how do they mobilize enough National Guard and get troops in there to get those people moved? We've got what we've got today. We know more today than we did yesterday. But the art of leadership, again, is going to be how we go after those vulnerable populations that if we don't move them today, they're going to be underwater tomorrow and not just surrounded by water. So our first responders, the team work seem to be working smooth between the state and federal government. Now the big challenge is the weather and the flooding that is going to happen based on the prediction. And the winds, Neil, will prevent the helicopters from going up. We're going to lose one of our most vulnerable assets, which is to do helicopter search and rescue, right. And that may be going on for till day 3, Neil.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned in general, maybe from our last conversation, is that many of the deaths tragically occur well after, days after the hurricane itself, flooding and that sort of thing. To that end, I mean, you had to address the rivalries and bickering between parties and jurisdiction issues and who had control, mayor, governor, administration officials. Right. We've learned a lot from the Katrina experience, a lot of that you address. But the president, for example, is tweeting from Camp David, where he's closely monitoring all this, General, saying that we are looking at a thorough federal response. We are leaving nothing to chance, quoting the president, and that city, state, and federal governors are working great together. So everyone seems to be, for the time being, on the same page. How do you police that about making sure they're in charge?
What the problem is, Neil, is they don't know what they don't know at this time, because the power outages for 300,000 people and the isolated people that are surrounded by water now along the Gulf Coast and they don't have the assessments. I think for the first 24 hours, people will be okay even if they're standing in water.
Right.
But by tomorrow, that situation is going to get a lot worse, and we're going to have more people without electricity in southern Houston. And that is going to make the problem more cascading, which I think then the federal government will be behind the Texas National Guard to see what they need in terms of response capacity. And I think the Texas government is going to have to mobilize more National Guard because of the size
more
of
than
this,
the 700
so
he's already activated. More than the 700.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. He's got a division down there, one of the best National Guard divisions we've got. I see at least a need for 10,000 to 15,000 National Guard. Wow. To go in there and go into all these isolated communities.
You know, General, I'm harking back to the fact you mentioned the energy and how important it is at the outset of your remarks, and particularly off the Texas coast, the Gulf Coast there. And I'm reminded of remarks you said, I think a few weeks ago, I hope I'm quoting you correctly, where you said our democracy has been hijacked of referring to these interests, that they ride and they go to the petroleum club and they strut there with their SUVs and they act like they are saving the world, but they are doing is saving their family trust fund. Are you saying that there's a disproportionate amount of interest on the economic side and not on the folks who really need the help?
I think at this point in time, Neil, that argument is based on not the necessary energy they provide for us to have heat and to have power.
Right.
In the day-to-day operations in the communities is where their influence. Right now, they are building a lot of infrastructure in known flood zones. We will see what happens after this storm, where the industry can reassess itself in building inside of wetlands and building inside of flood zones.
Okay.
And the impact it has, because we have to have that energy. There's no doubt about it.
Understood.
But they have over-influence in local governments and in decisions that are made in terms of control of what's happening in those local governments.
Okay,
that
General.
Is the theme.
That was the
and the
gist of the remarks.
context.
I thought as much. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.